Let the word go forth.
Fool me once.
Are you fired up?
I'm not a crook.
Are you ready to go?
Shame on you.
It's Abe Lincoln's Top Hat, hosted by Ben Kissel.
Fool me, can't get fooled again.
Hey, what's up, everyone? How you doing? Ben Kissel here. Travis Morningstar is going to be with me as well. Hello, Travis.
Hey.
Hey, Travis. All right, Marcus Parks is busy working on Knights of the Solar Templar Part 2, which is going to be very exciting. We have a lot of stuff to get to today. A little bit later on in the episode, I have an interview with Rachel Monroe. She profiled Damien Echols for the New York Times and is a contributor to The New Yorker. So that'll be a very fun interview. Wouldn't you say, Travis?
It was great.
Thank you. All right. I want to talk about a couple of things today. First, we have a new climate report that came out. Donald Trump doesn't believe it. When it comes to global warming and its effect on the United States and the world abroad. There are a couple of different key points to it that we'll go through. Also, there is a border crisis going on. The Army, U.S. military, has taken action, non-lethal action, but nonetheless aggressive action. They sent a bunch of, tear gas, and they tear gassed a bunch of kids. So that's horrible.
Cool
that seems to be the prerogative of this administration. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump is quoted via Twitter, which is nauseating to say. He says, Mexico should move the flag-waving migrants, many of whom are stone-cold criminals, back to their countries. And of course, we know these are people who are fleeing war-torn countries, places that are devastated by drug lords and violence. So these are not the criminals. The criminals are the ones that they are fleeing from. And there is a set of standards. There's a practice here where people come and seek refugee status. They get in line, they go and they talk to folks, they are processed. Those people weren't even allowed to get in line this past week without the military intervening. Mexico has detained a few people. There were some people, there were some bad actors that were throwing projectiles, rocks, and bottles. In comparison to the arsenal that we have, not exactly the most aggressive, but nonetheless, Mexico did end up detaining around 20 or 30 individuals, and they have said that they will be deporting those people back to their home countries. So Mexico is taking care of some of the more violent people that are more aggressive when it comes to our southern border.
Well, I mean, the whole thing started out as a peaceful protest.
Right.
And the only reason it became violent, like you said, they started throwing rocks, is because some people started to go underneath the gates through a river, through a ravine. Mm-hmm. And that's when they started tear gassing children and women. And that's when rocks were thrown.
So this is just classic escalation. This is what we do in this country. It happens all the time with law enforcement.
Created this bottleneck.
Yes.
Asylum is only now able to go asylum is only now possible through these ports of entry like San Ysidro, which are far and few between. You know, there's thousands of miles of border gates.
Right.
And at these processing centers, they're lowering the number of people who can be processed through asylum. So like these places only hold 300 people at a time, these centers, and they're only allowing 40 people to be processed a day. So you have people standing out there for hours, for days, and weeks, and now you have these migrants coming to basically a bottleneck created by Trump's new measures.
So it looks like most of the immigrants are from Honduras, and the number now is around 8,000. So as Travis was just explaining, wonderfully, I thought, that's exactly what's happening right now. Less availability in these centers. They're creating this chaos on the border, and there is a system. This is nothing new. People have been coming over our southern border for a long, long time, and administrations have handled this in different, more productive ways. So Donald Trump, he just wants to send the military down there. He did. Some of the military has since come back, but nonetheless, I do think that this is a man-made crisis, a Trump administration created crisis, and probably for political gain, as we saw what happened when he sent the military down. That was around $72 million was spent on that exercise. After the election, those people came back. So this is par for the course. It's disgusting and it's sad. And there's a lot of people who are like, well, the news media isn't covering this the right way.
Right.
They're like, they're just showing the children. They're just showing the women and the children. Well, that doesn't make them not real. And they're showing like That is real. There's no like, just because you don't like the image, you can't be like, well, there's other bad people there too. It's like, it doesn't matter. There's still children being tear gassed.
It's interesting how like steeped in post-truth we are, because we have one singular incident, one event in this one place near Tijuana, and we have different angles from it. We have a bird's eye view of it that makes it look like an invasion. And then you have on-the-ground photos of women and children getting tear gassed. And people just take it in any direction they want.
MS-13 is recruiting very young. You know, they're going for the toddlers now.
The uniform for MS-13 is very strange. The Disney Frozen t-shirt.
I know.
They're trying to get a softer image. I get it.
You can hold a lot of weaponry in lunch boxes and brown paper bags, school boxes, backpacks. Kirsten Nielsen, who's probably on her way out, currently the head of Homeland Security, she's getting a lot of heat for this as well. There's no love lost between her and Donald Trump. I'm not sure exactly what happened in the drama-filled White House between those two, but it looks like she's going to be on the way out anytime soon. So we'll continue to watch what's going on the border. It's absolutely egregious. It's horrible. And again, these are people that can greatly contribute to our economy if we just have a path to citizenship, or at the very least a path to a work visa. We need these people in our agriculture, in our, as I talked about it 2 episodes ago. If you look at construction, if you look at what do you call these things, like maid services? What's the proper name for that?
Sort of hospitality.
Service industry. Hospitality, service industries. We need these people. They're not the criminals. The criminals are who they're fleeing from. As we've talked about before, too, 2016, the only country that saw more deaths was Syria. The second was Mexico, and that's because of the cartels, because of the gangs, and because of all the violence. By the way, these cartels are benefiting greatly from our opioid epidemic. These are horrible people, but again, it's not the migrants that are the perpetrators of these horrendous crimes, because if you're a criminal, Mexico's a hell of a place to be. If you're a drug dealer and you're in Honduras, why the hell would you leave? It's Mecca. It's perfect. It's the place to hang out. So, nasty stuff. And obviously, for any other administration, you would say this is bad optics. Trump seems to love it. He's just like, this is what I wanted. This is perfect. This is making it great again.
It totally plays into his, this is an invasion thing. You get the right angle, the right camera angle makes it look exactly how he's portraying it.
But now, of course, there is going to be some pushback for Trump. There are some people who are claiming, like, this is interesting. So this comes in from Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Kevin McHalen. Look at that guy. Now, he says there were 69 migrants who crossed the border. They were arrested on the California side. All right, that's pretty par for the course. He said the Border Patrol's policy allows agents to use tear gas and other non-lethal methods, but noted the situation was resolved without serious injury. Still, the incident will be reviewed. He goes on to say, as the events unfolded, quick, decisive, effective action prevented an extremely dangerous situation. Again, I would argue that they escalated the situation. Now, one person here, this is according to Rodney Scott, he's the chief border agent in San Diego. He talks about how these were not people seeking asylum, and suggested that the children that were seen in some of the pictures were, quote, they were children of grabbers. The pictures of the kids were not pictures with them and their parents. They claimed that these were grabbers, people grabbing the kids and then running up to the border. Which again, you got to have a grain of salt with all this stuff. He says, why is a parent running up into an area where they know the tear gas is forming, and it's going to be formed as they're running up with a child? That's what Donald Trump said to reporters. And in some cases, they're not the parents. These are people, they call them quote unquote grabbers. Interesting word for Trump to be using.
Fraggle Rock.
They grab a child because they think they're going to have a certain status by having a child. And again, what makes more sense? It's actually women and children who are fleeing, or it's a series of grabbers who want nothing more than to take on a child. It's like a fun 80s comedy.
Grabbers, trimmers, who knows what's going on at these borders.
So that's the excuse from the Trump administration, is that these are not kids and their parents, it's kids and their grabbers, and it is what it is. So hopefully
Swiper the Fox made an appearance at the Tijuana Center.
I know people do a lot of things to get over into this country. I understand. But if this is just, if you are someone who is going to be coming into this country illegally for nefarious means, this is one of the most heavily guarded places to come. Like you're like El Chapo in his tunnels. You can go around. You can come in through different ports. Like this was, if you are someone who really wants to come and do something horrible, they would not come through this way. San
Ysidro is the most trafficked immigration route in the Western Hemisphere.
So it's also the most monitored.
90,000 people a year go through this. It's not a crack in the wall.
Right, exactly. Interesting. So that is the Border Patrol that fired on the migrants. And again, the military is really, for all intents and purposes, no longer there. There was a $72 million publicity stunt for the elections, and that is where Donald Trump is at right now. Who knows what he's going to do going forward. All right, let's talk a little bit more here. I want to talk, well, speaking of immigration, I don't really mention this stuff too often because I don't like to get down and I don't like to, even discuss some of these people. But what happened this week was interesting regarding this group called the Proud Boys.
Yes.
Now, you heard about this group, Travis?
Yes, this is
Are you a card-carrying member or?
No, well, I've never sworn my allegiance to any. What is it? The Chauvinist West?
I think it's the Chauvinist. I don't even know. They're a chauvinist male group.
I've never listed 5 cereal boxes in a row under duress.
If you do want to have a little bit of fun, watch the beat-in ceremony to become a Proud Boy. You got to list 5 cereals, and then these pasty-ass dudes punch you, kind of, but
Snap,
they're more
crackle, and pop. Beat the shit out of you.
They're more used to playing video games than actually doing anything physical, so it's quite humorous, the beat-ins.
Yeah, the Proud Boys are basically like a racist frat, right? Like the Kappa 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 KKK.
So the FBI, they called them an extremist group. So now they're officially on this list of extremist groups, and because of that, Gavin McInnes, who is someone that I know, their founder, not their leader according to him, but their founder, he has stepped down as being what he really is, their leader. He has stepped down. And it was a humorous 30-minute spiel because, of course, now some of his members were arrested after this brawl in NYU. And they're seeking, they're looking at some pretty significant time. And, of course, now that it's labeled an extremist group, you can get added charges and added length to your sentence. So Gavin McInnes is no longer a part of the Proud Boys. And, I know... I did not realize how horrible Gavin was until they went on his show. And then it's always like really enlightening because, of course, Gavin is talking about how America isn't a nation of immigrants. He's talking about how it's a white country, all this shit. And Gavin just goes on and on, anti-immigrant rant after anti-immigrant rant. And I'm looking at the guy and being like, dude, you're fucking Canadian. Like, what is going on? Like, You are an immigrant. You are the antithesis of everything that you're talking about. This country, of course, it's welcome to immigrants. But I just wanted to say this in the context of be careful who you're following. Be careful, what groups you decide to join. Just be careful who you put your trust in, because I guarantee you, as soon as times get tough, they're gonna, hightail it out of there because they're weak, and that's their entire thing. This is why he had to go, and really basically Gavin, his group is people, our friend Holden knew someone who was in a sketch group of his, or that was in a sketch class that he was teaching, and he went over to join the Proud Boys. He was an improviser. The guy wanted to be a comedian, but he didn't think it was tough enough, or it was like too PC or something. So he got a lot of young, influential kids, or easily influenced kids, not influential. I guess influential somewhat. But he got easily influenced kids to follow him, and they all really trusted him. And now, of course, again, when the going gets tough, he just gets out of there. So anyway, I just want to say, be careful who you follow, because these people are not going to back you up. Same thing with Trump, when he's talking to his reporters, or when he's talking to his supporters, rather, about beating up reporters. If you beat up a reporter, dude, he is not helping you. There is no, do not follow these people. Because when they don't care, they don't give a shit. They don't give a fuck if you go to prison forever. They don't give a fuck what happens to you. They only care about themselves, and that's why they're just propping up their own ego. And you're just a little piece of you're a support beam for their egotistical home.
And the thing with Proud Boys is what Gavin does is he does this kind of rhetorical trick where he'll position Islam as being oppressive to women and all this stuff, and then he'll say, we're actually against that, and sort of in his own way is sort of claiming a progressive stance while mixing in actual hateful.
It's a male chauvinist club.
Yeah,
I mean the hypocrisy
is basically he's trying to sort of establish some sort of mainstream acceptability in this hate group, and so people like UCB improv kids think that some parts of his philosophy they can actually gel with.
Right.
And Gavin himself, he always sort of says like, we're not with neo-Nazis, we're not with the alt-right. He explicitly tries to separate himself because it makes it more appealing to the mainstream.
I don't like to. I'm not a hot goss guy, but in the context here, Gavin is a white supremacist. I went out for drinks with him one time after I did his show. And again, I mean, I'm not making it, but it was what it was. I just did not know, it's hard to know who people are. So went out for a drink, and he went through the entire, the racial hierarchy of intelligence. And it was, the N-word was said quite a bit. It was like one of those rap songs, Travis. Yeah. But of course he is not a rapper. And at that moment I was like, it was fascinating. At some point you break out of the conversation and you're just like, this is going to be a sociological study of like what is going on. And it's just hard to believe that anyone would listen to him, because I'm sure he had very racially motivated conversations with a lot of his members. It's difficult for me to think anyone would actually be like, this is the guy. This is the dude I'm going to follow. But obviously a lot of, again, easily influenced, lonely, lost kids did think that this was the guy to follow. So he is not a good person. He's got, I don't want to go into but he was a regular on Red Eye when I was producing there.
Yeah.
And, there was one time he came in, and, it is what it is. Everyone's got their problems, and I'm not trying to, like, malign anyone. But anyway, he just absolutely hammered, covered in blood. And for some reason, and I was filling in for him on that show because he didn't show up, so I was going to fill in. And for some reason, they still put him on air. He showed up just for the C block, which is towards the end of the show. And he just showed up, and he was covered, like literally his hair was covered in blood. And then the night before, he got into a car accident, then he got into a bike accident. He was still hammered. And, I don't know how they put him on air. That was really bizarre. I thought maybe tonight's not the night for the television, But it was just another indication, of just the kind of personality he is and just who he is as a person. I mean, everyone gets hammered. That's not a problem. But the hairstylists were quite upset that they had to style the man's hair literally pulling out hair and blood, pulling out blood. So, he's a little unhinged. He's a little off the deep end there. So it was just sad to see this Proud Boys thing, which I do think started out as a bit of a lark, maybe a little tongue in cheek. But then it got very serious real quick.
In his own words, Gavin McInnes says he doesn't hate minorities.
Right.
He hates white liberals who don't accept the fact that minorities are inferior to the white race.
He's a Canadian.
That is
what is going on over there?
Tortured logic to say that just say it. I'm a white supremacist.
Honestly, yeah. He and Richard Spencer and this whole slowly evaporating group of morons. Their time they peaked. With Yellow Bastard, they peaked with Trump, and now it's all gonna hopefully dissipate a little bit, because I don't, again. So I don't want to sit here and if you're a Proud Boy and you're listening or whatever, but you don't have to be one. It's okay. You can just change. Don't be part of these groups. I mean, you can't try. As we talk about cults all the time on Last Pod, it's like the leaders would never care about you. They will only protect themselves, and that's exactly what Gavin did. As soon as the FBI was like, you're in trouble, you're an extremist group, he just cut and run. And he says it's because he doesn't want the people to be associated, the folks that are in looking at significant time, again, these kids, or, young adults. I don't want to say kids. I'm 37, okay? Not everyone has my wisdom of a 37-year-old.
Well, it's 30-year-olds that are putting on MAGA hats and then going around calling themselves Proud Boys. These aren't kids. These are
maybe they're
men.
Not kids. Maybe I'm giving them too much. Grown men, sure, yep. But the ones looking at significant time for the NYU brawl, which is just so stupid. he says that he's doing it so that they don't get more time added. So now there's no association with him, and it's
making
just
up an excuse saying that by disassociating himself, those people will get lighter sentences, which is not a thing.
No, it's not, and he's just obviously. I don't even frickin' know. I can't. They're all around these people, these little political cults that pop up, and they seem to be popping up more and more. And anyway. If you're in that group, just get out of it, man, because it's cooler to just be alone. I don't even know. I never understood the group mentality. That's why I liked wrestling in high school, because I did not like to play basketball and I did not like to play football. God, I can't be dealing with all these other people. If I'm going to lose, I just want to lose myself without having to blame and take all the rewards for winning too.
Be your own person. Don't get radicalized by this guy.
Oh, can you imagine
spreads
following
his
that
ass
douchebag?
cheeks on his fucking web stream
Yeah,
show.
I know. When you think of the perfect gift, you probably don't think of an electric toothbrush. But the Quip electric toothbrush is one of the most gift-guided gifts of the season, and here's why. It's perfect for everyone with a mouth, and it's something they'll use twice every day. Quip makes holiday travels clean and easy with a multi-use cover that mounts to mirrors and unmounts to slide over the bristles for on-the-go brushing. Quip doesn't require a clunky charger and runs for 3 months on a single charge. Quip is the gift that keeps refreshing, with brush heads automatically delivered on a dentist-recommended schedule every 3 months for just $5. And you can give the gift of healthy teeth all year with prepaid refills for a year to make sure they're never using old, worn out, or ineffective bristles. Quip is one of the first electric toothbrushes accepted by the American Dental Association and has thousands of verified 5-star reviews. Seriously, guys, I've been taking my Quip everywhere I go, and it's still running strong on its first charge. I love the multi-use cover and how easy it is to throw it into my carry-on and go. No tangled wires or chargers. And sure, the Quip is practical and gives you a good deep clean, but it also looks beautiful and stylish and is sure to be a great gift to give to just about anyone in your life. That's why I love Quip and why they have over 5,000 verified 5-star reviews. Quip looks like a big-ticket tech gift with a stocking stuffer price starting at just $25. And if you go to getquip.com/tophat right now, you get your first refill pack for free with a Quip electric toothbrush, but you don't have to tell your giftee that. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/tophat. All right, well, moving on. Let's talk a little bit before we get to our interview with Rachel Monroe. Global warming is now affecting the United States more than ever before, as we just saw with the campfire fires. I mean, this California, apparently that's contained now, but they're still working on it. I guess some of the roots and underground fires still exist. It's horrifying what happened in California, what is happening in California. So this report just came out. And it's the U.S. climate assessment. Donald Trump, again, has said that he just doesn't. It's so easy just not to be like, don't believe it. It just makes everything so much easier when you don't believe anything. So then you don't have to do anything. So, and by the way, if Donald Trump was in freshman year of high school, he would just fail science class. He would just be like, the teacher would be like, you can't just not believe it. You got to take the test.
Well, I was thinking there's a difference between what Trump does, a difference between lying and what Trump does, which is, I think, technically bullshitting, which is just sort of like a willful disregard. There's lying, spinning something, and then what Trump does, which is what he did here. I don't believe it. I don't care, and I disregard it completely. All
right. Well, the gist of this, now this is volume 2 of the latest National Climate Assessment. It's around 1,600 pages, so it's a pretty thick book there, pretty thick manual here, pretty thick article. The scientific report, which comes out nearly every 4 years as mandated by Congress, was produced by 13 federal agencies and released by the Trump administration, which makes it so interesting that he denies it. It was released by his administration, technically. All right, so what are some of the key takeaways here? One of the key takeaways is predicted impacts have materialized. More and more of the predicted impacts of global warming are now becoming a reality. For instance, the 2014 assessment forecast that coastal cities would see more flooding in the coming years as sea levels rose. That's no longer theoretical. Scientists have now documented a record number of quote-unquote nuisance flooding events during high tides in cities like Miami and Charleston, South Carolina. This is according to the report. It says high tide flooding is now posing daily risks to businesses, neighborhoods, infrastructure, transportation, and ecosystems in the Southeast. As the oceans have warmed, disruptions in United States fisheries, long predicted, are now underway. For example, in 2012, record ocean temperatures caused lobster catches in Maine to peak a month earlier than usual, and the distribution chain was unprepared. Number 2, what's another key point here? It all ties together. The report suggests a different approach to assessing the effects of climate change by considering how various impacts on food supplies, water, and electricity generation, for example, interact with each other. This is according to the report. It says, it is not possible to fully understand the implications of climate change on the United States without considering the interactions among sectors and their consequences. It gives several examples, including recent droughts in California and elsewhere, that in combination with population changes affect demand for water and energy. And that is the, to use a cliche, one of the issues with what happened in California. A lot of the climate experts were saying it was a perfect storm. Again, that's the cliche. When it comes to population changes, when it comes to the drought, and the few times it has had rainfall over these past 7 or so years, and the few times they have had rainfall, all that really ended up doing was growing the brush. So then it would stop. So it would rain for one little moment, and then it would stop. The brush then forms, and next thing you know, the drought continues. So it created the unbelievable arena for the fires to take place. So it's got the population, the droughts, the little bit of rainfall building up the brush, and so that really was a perfect storm. All right, number 3, beyond borders. The United States military has long taken climate change seriously, both for its potential impact on troops and infrastructure around the world, and for its potential to cause political instability in other countries. The report cites these international concerns, but goes far beyond the military. Climate change is already affecting American companies overseas, operations and supply chains, it says, and as these impacts worsen, it will take a toll on trade and the economy. Number 4, adaptation. Since 2014, more detailed economic research has estimated that climate change could cause hundreds of billions of dollars in annual damage as deadly heat waves, coastal flooding, and an increase in extreme weather take their toll. To limit that harm, communities will need to take steps and prepare beforehand. Because of this, more and more communities are taking measures such as preserving wetlands along the coast to act as buffers against the storm. But outside of a few places in Louisiana and Alaska, few coastal communities are rethinking their development patterns in order to avoid the impacts from rising seas and severe weather that the report says is surely coming. And another thing here is focus on air quality. The report notes this with high confidence that climate change will increase ozone levels as rising temperatures and changes in the atmosphere continue, but the increase will not be uniform. By near the end of the century, the worst ozone levels will be found across a wide expanse of the Midwest and northern Great Plains. And I'm going to go into more detail next week on what's happening to the farmlands in the Midwest. Specifically, they are being devastated. This is affecting everyone. They don't care how much money you got. They don't care what your sexual orientation is. It doesn't matter what your age or your height or your weight or your race. This is affecting all of us. So climate change is something very real, and it's something that we're going to be dealing with for a long time, as what was predicted back a couple of years ago, a decade ago, 20 years ago, is now coming to fruition. And we're seeing it, as we just saw again in California, how brutal and dangerous and scary it all is. All right, everyone. Well, now it's time for an interview with Rachel Monroe. I hope you enjoy it. All right, joining me now, she is an author. She just recently profiled Damien Echols in the New York Times. She is also a contributor to The New Yorker. I am honored to have with me Rachel Monroe. Thank you, Rachel, for being on the show.
Thank you. Hi.
All right. So we got a lot to get to. First, we were just discussing before we started recording what's going on right now regarding journalism. I want to get to Damien Echols. I want to hear your thoughts on WM3. But first, I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on right now with your profession. profession. And before we started the interview, you were talking about how sometimes when you go out in public and folks are like, what do you do for a living? Which is like the go-to first question in New York, and I would assume all of Los Angeles as well. You oftentimes don't even tell them that you're a journalist. Why do you think that is right now? What's going on right now with the profession in general, or people's perception of it?
Well, sometimes people shoot journalists.
Ah, yes, that's the problem.
That's, I guess, the big fear. But not an active fear that I have or anything. But, I live in rural Texas. A lot of the places that I travel to for my work, I like to report on rural places in the Southwest. And you just find out, you can tell very quickly that the feeling towards journalists isn't that positive. I was actually just at a motel in Utah the other day, and the guy who at the motel room next to me had a Confederate flag, the license plate bordery thing that you had. He had Confederate flag border thing, and his personalized license plate was fake news. Like, I'm not going to tell that guy what I do for a living. He's going to break into my motel room.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I think all of this stuff is coming from the top, right? Donald Trump's whole fake news rants, what happened with Jim Acosta, as I said before as well. I mean, I'm not a huge Jim Acosta fan, but at the same time, as the judge that Trump appointed agreed with, the man deserves his press credentials or his White House credentials. Do you feel under this past, been about 2 years now? I know we're all age. I feel like it's been 30 years we've been living under this guy as president. Do you feel like it's gotten worse in your experience over these past 2 years? People being more vocal against your profession?
Yeah, and I will notice that sometimes when I do admit that I'm a journalist, people will say things like, "Oh," like almost as if it's like you're saying that you're a lawyer or something terrible like that. But I will say, I mean, mostly I think it's entirely undeserved and frightening, and the free press is a cornerstone of democracy and everything. But I do think if I was gonna be a devil's advocate or something and find a smidgen of truth in any of it, I do feel like, as a person who lives not in a big city on the coast, I can sometimes feel why people feel like the news media doesn't understand them or doesn't represent them. There can be like a condescending or frankly ignorant vibe.
Totally.
Occasionally, but that doesn't mean people should be. That means we should have more journalists. There should be more journalists, not less, and not more intimidation.
Right, I completely agree. I mean, we travel all around this country and the world doing our show, and I love going to the smaller places. We were just in Dallas, in Austin. We were in Houston last year. Texas is absolutely gorgeous, but you go to places like Oklahoma City, and you go to smaller towns in St. Louis or around St. Louis, and you do get that vibe where people just feel as if the mainstream media, I hate that term at this point, but they do feel like there's a massive disconnect. So I understand some of the resentment regarding that. And
as newsrooms get defunded and the smaller newspapers don't have the money to hire people and do the work, then people in Oklahoma City or wherever else aren't seeing the results of what journalism, the positive things that it can do in their lives. And so all they're seeing is talking heads on TV, and so I resent them. Kind
of the Clear Channel effect, what happened with radio, where now it's just all of radio in this country is 4 DJs in South Florida, and they're supposed to talk to the entire country. I completely agree. Thank you so much for your insights on that. So you recently had a chance to profile Damien Echols. Of course, Damien Echols, he's out and he's doing his book tour, and you also have a book coming out yourself. It's a true crime book. It's called Savage Appetites. Can you tell me a little bit, what was the main interest? Why did you choose, as far as your journalistic focus, to be true crime? Was that because of the more recent boom, or because criminal justice reform perhaps has been something you've thought about in the past? Why true crime now?
Well, I'm lucky that the boom coincided, although conflicted, because I think I have trouble with the Boones too.
Well, why? Tell me about that, because this is an interesting phenomenon. Marcus, Henry, and I constantly discuss this, and as a matter of fact, we were talking about this in our Peter Curtin series before World War II in Germany. Obviously, the rise of far right fascism. True crime was also a huge component of their culture. It was a true crime boom. Everyone was reading the salacious details of murder on a regular basis. Why do you think true crime is so big right now, and what are your what makes you trepidatious about it?
Well, I feel like I should just say you just have to read my book. You know, I can't sum it up. I wrote a whole book, but I think.
Well, you got to read the book. Yes.
It's not out yet, so you can't.
Okay.
I think I'm also particularly interested in why women are so interested in true crime.
Right.
That would be my main focus, because if you think about it, or you look at the statistics, the vast majority of murderers are men, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of murder victims are men. Most criminal prosecutors, criminal defense lawyers are all men. Homicide detectives are all men, but the people who consume the stories, I mean, I guess you guys accepted, tend to be overwhelmingly women.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's weird and interesting.
Well, you know, that's an interesting thing that you brought up, because obviously, Marcus, Henry, and I'm from Wisconsin. We got a boy from Texas, Henry coming out of, I believe, Queens. We're not exactly Shannon Tatum, or is it Channing Tatum? I don't know, but none of the fact that our Channing. Oh, that's a strange one. Okay, Channing Tatum. We're not exactly that, but we were fascinated. When we started doing last podcast on the left, in 2011. That there were so many women. Our audience is around 60% female, and yeah, you're right. I mean, for us, that was a really eye-opening situation. Is there any component that you want to give us a little tease for your book, Savage Appetites, as to why that is the phenomenon?
I mean, one of my working theories is that there are a lot of big emotions, maybe that women are socialized to not express. Things like rage or terror, or
Sure.
just these kind of like big scary feelings. And so these stories can be a way to talk about things while not exactly talking about them, if that makes sense.
Sure.
They can be like a kind of displacement. And I think that, like, women, it's terrible to do huge broad generalizations about gender, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
I think if you have been pervasively maybe discriminated against or exposed to injustice, then you have your antenna up for those stories,
right.
And maybe you're not likely to go along with the popular conception given by the police or law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And fucked up psychology is it's adaptive for women to understand those things.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about injustice. Obviously, on this show, we talk a lot about criminal justice reform, the hundreds of thousands of people behind bars right now who are innocent. The Innocence Project, it's really backed up. And one of those people that was behind bars was a person that you covered, did a profile on, and of course we covered extensively in our West Memphis 3 episodes, Damien Echols. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on Damien Echols. What was that profile experience like, and what was it like sitting down and speaking with him?
Well, I had first, like many people, seen Damien Echols on the Paradise Lost documentary on HBO. I think I had just watched the first one before I became aware of that. I didn't watch the subsequent ones until much later.
Okay.
And if you watch the documentaries, you're just like, oh God, this poor kid is in way over his head.
Right.
And I actually for my book, had gotten close to his wife, Lori Davis, who fell in love with him while he was in prison, basically through those documentaries,
right.
and was instrumental to getting him out. So I write about her a lot in my book.
Yeah, that's, let's focus on that for a second, because as I was reading through his biography, that love affair, and we didn't really get to it on our episode because it's not exactly true crime, I suppose, but the love of Lori for Damien was really remarkable. Moving out there to West Memphis, near where he was incarcerated, leaving her family. Everyone's like, "You're crazy. What are you doing?" What was that experience like? Can you talk a little bit about just their love for each other and how she was able to save his life in many ways. Because of her, they got Eddie Vedder on board. Because of her, they were able to really keep the legal momentum going, despite, of course, it taking 18 years.
Yeah, so they have published a volume of their letters that they wrote back and forth, which are just insane. They're very dramatic and sexy and dark, and they're like a 19th century novel.
Okay.
But real, just this sort of forbidden love. And I remember reading that and being like, there's no way that these people can actually sustain this relationship outside of prison. You know, you hear about people who have prison romances, and part of the appeal is that the person is unattainable, right? So you can just project your fantasies all over them. And then I remember reading that she got him out of prison. She played such a key role. She's a very modest person, so she doesn't get as much credit maybe as she deserves. But she, and you know who else was key, was Fran Walsh, who is married to Peter Jackson. Yeah, she is obviously like a screenwriter and director in her own right. So when they became involved in the case, she was like obsessed with it. She's apparently a forensics obsessive, just in her spare time. And she would, when they came onto the case, they didn't just donate money. She paid for Lori to work on the case full time every day and would send like 20-point instructions every day. She's in New Zealand time, right? So Lori would wake up every morning and be like, here are my jobs from Fran Walsh to go, find this, talk to this person, get this forensic test done. I mean, she just like directed the investigation, which is amazing.
That is absolutely incredible. There were so many heroes in that story, and it's just one of those situations. I think we mentioned this when we covered WM3, how Damien is all three of them are the least lucky and most lucky people really around, because there's so many people right now without that kind of outside help and that kind of outside assistance and outside money and outside concern. So they're just sitting in cells right now, banging their heads against a wall, knowing that they're convicted of a crime they didn't commit. So is there any, what was your thoughts regarding how much work it took, despite the fact, the DNA came back, the prosecutor in that case was just hell-bent, and the judge was just hell-bent on not having any blame placed on their shoulders, hence the Elford plea, which I know Jason Baldwin, it's the bane of his existence. He says he regrets it on a daily basis, according to his social media anyway. And what are your thoughts on how difficult it was, even though the evidence was in, and it still took years after the evidence was received, that these dudes didn't do this, or definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, they shouldn't have been convicted the way that they were. What are your thoughts on how long it took? And do you have any insight onto Lori's thoughts of that as well?
Yeah, I mean, it took so long. It's crazy to think about. And the case, if you look back at it, it has all of these hallmarks that we now know through the Innocence Project's research that are the key points of wrongful conviction. Interrogating like children, right? People who are under 18, false confessions, bad forensics, all that stuff is there. But I mean, what did somebody say? The American legal system is like a giant cruise ship, and it just takes a really long time for it to turn around. Right. And that is by design, right? So if you're ever in trouble, you want to make sure that you don't get convicted in the first place, because getting a wrongful conviction overturned is just an incredibly laborious and difficult process. I mean, part of that is, for a long time before Lori started getting really actively involved, and all that funding came in, they were working with public defenders. And that's, no shade on public defenders, but they are often really poorly paid, very overworked. They don't have the resources to get a lot of the forensic testing, for example, to help people get out. And so that just makes things move really slowly, unless you all of a sudden have, millionaire celebrities funneling a bunch of money in. And even then, it takes so long.
Even then, it took 18 years, and again, there are hundreds of thousands of people without Eddie Vedder's support, and I'm not maligning Eddie Vedder in any way, but there's just a lot. I mean, I thought what he did was great, but there are a lot of people out there that we don't know, and we don't know their names, and that's unfortunate. Hey guys, today's Top Hat is brought to you by Roofstock. What if there was an investing platform that allowed you to collect passive income and generate averaged analyzed returns of 8% in markets across the U.S., not just the ones in your backyard? With Roofstock.com, you can buy, sell, and own investment properties the way pro investors do and start earning passive income right away. Everyone knows real estate is a great way to build personal wealth and diversify your investment portfolio, but it can be complicated. With Roofstock, you can invest in single-family homes across the country with as little as $20,000 down. Roofstock has made the whole process transparent and easy to engage. View inspection reports, take a 3D tour, see neighborhood ratings. And when you find a property you like, add it to your cart. It's as easy as buying a pair of shoes online. Roofstock offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, and if your vacant rental property doesn't have a tenant after 45 days of closing, Roofstock will pay your projected rental income for up to a year. This month only, they've got a special deal for our listeners. You will get a $500 credit towards your Roofstock Marketplace fee at roofstock.com/tophat. That's roofstock.com, roofstock.com/tophat for a $500 credit. But it's this month only. roofstock.com/tophat. What's your view now, sitting down with Damien, talking with Lori? Has that altered your view at all of what has to happen with criminal justice? When you talk to Lori, when you talk to Damien, do they share any insights with you on what they would like to see done as far as changes go to make it more humane, rational, and reasonable?
Well, it's interesting talking to Damien because something that he will say a lot was that getting out of prison was just as traumatic as going in. And that's how he'll say it, not like almost as traumatic, but he'll say just as traumatic, which I think is so fascinating and troubling. And I think that is in part because, I write about this in the piece, but he was kept for the last decade or so of his sentence, or the last decade before he was let out.
Right.
He was kept in solitary confinement.
Right.
And that was not because he was bad, but because in Arkansas, they had built, like many other states in the 90s, they got caught up in this tough on crime thing.
Absolutely.
That was all age and built a supermax prison. All these states were doing this. It was a great thing for politicians to do.
Yep.
It made them seem tough against the criminals, and was a way, throw some prime contracts some people's way, I'm sure.
Yep.
And then in Arkansas, like in plenty of other states, they found out these supermax prisons are supposed to be punitive custody, right, for the worst of the worst. So if you're in prison and that's not, you need like extra punishment, they'll send you to supermax. But they didn't have enough people who were needing to go there. So, and meanwhile, the regular prison was overcrowded. So, in Arkansas and Ohio and some other states, they decided to move their death row prisoners there, not because they had misbehaved or anything, but just because they had this shiny new prison that was sitting empty and that would otherwise seem like a boondoggle that it is.
Right. I mean, this is just, it is, when you say those things, it makes my heart break and my skin crawl. Core Civic, Geo Group, I mean, these corporations that make millions and millions and billions of dollars off of human suffering. What is, as far as, I just want to hear your thoughts, what does it say about us as a society where we have an entire corporation, a corporate structure, a financial structure that is based off of human suffering? What does that, how does that make you feel?
Ben, it makes me feel bad. I would say that I think that the reason they were able to move these death row prisoners there is because essentially they were thinking of these people as disposable.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, society does treat them that way. And you've been talking a lot about the people who are potentially wrongfully convicted who are still in prison. But in some ways, I think that the talk about innocence can be a kind of decoy. I mean, I don't think anybody should be in those conditions.
Right.
I think that like supermax prisons, you're basically in solitary confinement in a cell with no windows. You can't see out.
Right.
There are all these ingenious ways that people have in prison of talking through the toilet pipes and stuff that they muffle all of that. It's just sadistic. Basically.
Right. It is.
It's just keeping you don't even have interactions with the guards. Just like cutting people off from any human contact.
Right.
And I just this is personal opinion. I don't care what you did. I don't think the state should be doing that to anybody.
I completely agree. So, and that's what makes that statement from Damien so interesting, where he said coming out of prison was just as shocking or just as traumatic as going in. What was like? Why? Did you get some insight of like why that was the case?
Well, he's such a like fascinating and remarkable person. He had adapted to this terrible situation in a way, and then I think like unadapting becomes really hard. I mean, he had all of these and still struggles with these cognitive issues. Like his eyesight, that's not cognitive, but that's just physical, I guess.
Right.
His eyesight had deteriorated in a really terrible way because he wasn't seeing anything.
Exactly.
So his brain, his eyeballs and his brain kind of atrophied. Ugh. He was telling me that he used to love movies, right? So he gets out of prison, he's like, let's go see a movie. And he would just immediately fall asleep within 2 or 3 minutes because his theory is that it was just total cognitive overload. His brain just could not handle that stimulus. It hadn't had any stimulus. It's like when people it's like the Donner Party thing, right? When if you've been starving to death for months and then you just like all of a sudden there's food and you scarf it down, then you die. You know, your body can't handle it. He couldn't recognize faces. He'd sort of lost the ability to recognize faces. Like time was really weird for him. He was very stressed out about being alone. Just he couldn't sleep. He couldn't keep a normal schedule. This is something that you hear from a lot of people who get out of prison. Just the adaptive strategies that work inside are not suited to outside. And then he's in this situation where you mentioned the Alford plea. You know, these guys were let out of prison, but they weren't, because they were still technically guilty.
Right.
They didn't get any compensation. They couldn't sue the state. So usually if it's a wrongful conviction, at least there's like some token money, or sometimes it's like a significant amount of money that people get to be like, oops, like sorry about those decades that we stole. But they didn't get any of that. And so he was put in this position where basically the only way he had to make any money was to go out and start, telling his story and selling. And this is like it's a fortunate position to be in a way, like you were saying, but also really terrible. He has to just go relive his trauma in front of audiences over and over again. Right. To try to make enough money to live on.
Absolutely. We're talking to Rachel Monroe. You got to get this book. When does this book come out? Savage Appetites. It's not out yet, but when does it come out?
August. I got to finish it.
Oh my God, we know the feeling. Marcus is currently, at his desk, chained to his desk, working as all of us work in our own unique ways. That is so. Anyway, so Savage Appetites. Make sure to get that book when it comes out. So, what was it when it comes to Damien, when it comes to West Memphis 3, when you're talking about all of these things with him? Did you get any insight into the other two, right? Because this is why I love Damien. I would love to speak with him. I know now he's doing his tour and stuff, but it seems to me like Jason Baldwin, in a lot of ways, was one of the heroes of this case that doesn't necessarily get quite as much exposure. But did you get any insight into their relationship? Are they still friendly, or is it? I mean, they had more time behind bars than they did as friends. So, what's their relationship like? Was there any insight into that?
I'm not sure. They like. I see on Instagram that they write nice things to each other. But beyond that, I'm not sure. I texted briefly with Jason the other day. He's doing incredible work. Like you were saying, he's got an organization. He lives in Austin now.
Yep.
He's got an organization called Proclaim Justice that's doing wrongful conviction work. I know for a little while he was maybe hoping to go to law school. I don't know how that works exactly.
Right.
But it's funny because they have reacted in such different ways. Damien really wants to put all that behind him. He told me, he was like, everybody thinks that time in my life, that case is so interesting. I don't think it's interesting at all.
Right, of course.
He just wants to he does this magic stuff. He just wants to look forward and do that. And Jason, has become this warrior for justice.
Yep.
You can kind of see it if you look back, if you watch the documentary again, in which he's like this twig of a kid. He just is a little baby, but you can tell he's got this little justice gene kind of bubbling within him. And it's cool that's how he's turned out.
It is. Yeah, he is doing amazing work, and if you get a chance, just follow him on Instagram and support the causes that he's working on. When it comes to Texas,
and I should say Jesse, I think is back in West Memphis, and nobody that I know is in touch with him.
Okay, yeah, I think he
he left out, and I feel bad. He shouldn't be left out.
You know, I hope he's doing absolutely. I hope he's doing great. When it comes to Texas, we were just down there. What was it? It was Tuesday. It was the midterms a couple of Tuesdays ago. And obviously we're watching the Beto O'Rourke election versus Ted Cruz. And the fact that it was so close, for me, was really encouraging in a lot of ways. When it comes to your state, do you think that Texas is becoming more of a purple state? Do you think that that's going to be able to hold, just with your experience, just your personal experience there, talking with friends, and just being around the community?
I hope so. And I agree with you. It was encouraging. I remember I was here however many years ago when Wendy Davis was running for governor.
Sure.
And she was another person who seemed to have a lot of energy behind her, at least if you went by like what was going on Twitter. And then she just lost so hard. She lost by so much.
Yeah.
And that was maybe a couple years after I'd moved to Texas. And I remember being really heartbroken and be like, what have I done?
Right.
Why am I here in this stupid state? And the fact that so I had really steeled myself. I was like, he's gonna just really go down in flames. But the fact that it was so close was incredible.
Do you feel like the tide? Because it's interesting. I think that we're getting a lot more purple states and what were considered extremely red states before. And of course, the question is, does that hold, or does the momentum swing back? But the Democrats were able to pick up more seats than they did, or since they picked up the more seats since right after Watergate, after Nixon. So they really were able to crush it out in this past cycle. Do you think that the people of Texas are just a little bit annoyed with what's going on, talking about how the media is out of touch, but do you think they're a little bit annoyed of what's going on when it comes to the executive, when it comes to Trump, when it comes to the administration? Or is that another thing that's just not really discussed?
Well, it's a big state, so I don't want to speak for all of it. I know in my little corner of it, which is rural, tends to vote Democrat, predominantly Latino.
Okay.
There is a strong sentiment against the president. But, in Texas, the issue is it's getting people registered to vote and then getting them to vote. If the actual makeup of the state voted, then things would be really different. But Texas makes it really hard. I was registering people to vote this year. Texas is the only state. It's got these stupid rules. You have to get notarized. You have to pass a test.
Right.
And then be notarized. And then you can only register people in your county. And if you want to register somebody in the next county over, you have to pass another test. And they just make it really difficult and so then Texas ranks really low in the numbers of voter participation and stuff. So I think it's going to be like the young people, right? And
well, I don't know. There's a lot I've seen, as you travel around, you go to these airports, I see so many middle school kids wearing the MAGA hats. It's like, it's kind of crazy. But then you think about like a juvenile president and you're like, I get it. If you're 14 years old, you're like, this guy is pretty cool. It's like Cartman is president, and it really is. So I suppose there's a little bit of when it comes to the youth, it can go either way. It's a double-edged sword, I think, in some ways. But you said that you had a large Latino community around you in your rural area of Texas. Has there been a chilling effect given the rhetoric and, of course, the actions of ICE, and now we see what's going on the border? Have you noticed anything in that community where they're feeling a little bit more tension, they're feeling a little bit more tense because of the policies that are being passed and proposed?
Anything I would have to share would be anecdotal. I know there are some undocumented people in our community who are certainly feeling nervous, but it's that chilling effect of not even wanting to talk about it because talking about it brings attention. And,
right.
And so far, most of the ICE raids have been in more urban areas, so nobody wants to invoke that. But, we're like 2 hours away from Tornillo, which is where the tent cities are with the kids. It feels really, for being out in the middle of nowhere, we're suddenly on some sort of front line.
Right.
Crazy.
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things, specifically when it comes to the border. A lot of the people who live on the border, when it comes to like building the wall, all of this stuff, they're like, can you not take my property away? It's a lot of times it's the people in Montana and Wyoming where they're like, build the wall. And people who actually live on the border are like, I like my backyard. So could you not build the wall? That would also be great.
Yeah. And if you talk to people around here who've been out here all of their lives and who have probably voted Republican their whole lives, they grew up with an open border, and especially in these rural, remote places, sometimes the closest city is in Mexico, and there was this free passage back and forth, that people grew up with this free flow back and forth and are really nostalgic for that.
Right.
And I think the realities of the border are much more clear and nuanced to people down here than they are, to people in Ohio who
totally
have stupid ideas about, frankly.
Well, it's funny because we always think about the border as like they're not coming in, but you're also not going out. And there is a lot of my friend, as you know, Marcus, being a Texas guy. He has echoed similar sentiment where it's like people used to just go to Mexico for the day, and it was like it's okay. And now, obviously, given the tension, they're not. I mean, it's very constrictive in a sense.
Oh, totally. I mean, there are places where people used to just be able to walk right across. You could really literally wade across the river and go get some tacos, and now it's a 4-hour drive across the international border, and it's just these little towns have dried up.
Right.
It's a chilling effect on tourism, on families that exist on both sides. It's a real bummer. I mean, that feels like a facetious way to talk about
No,
it, but
it is.
you listen to people talk about the old days. It's really fun. We have this festival down here, which is really fun, on Mother's Day that they started a few years ago. That's so the border, right, is in the middle of the river. So
okay.
there's this part of the river where people gather on both sides of it. It's maybe like 20 feet across. And the first time they did it, so it's party on the Mexico side, party on the U.S. side. The dogs get into the water first. Border Patrol is there watching. Okay. Then the little kids get in the water. The kids are, walking back and forth across this international border in the river. Border Patrol is sort of like, what are we supposed to do?
Oh, my gosh.
And then by the end of the day, everybody's in the river just crossing back and forth like it used to be. And it kind of exposes the fiction of this.
Right.
This border needing to be this, insanely militarized thing. It's just, you're just walking back and forth across the river.
Totally, and militarized is the right word. As you were talking about that, it reminded me of South Korea and North Korea, the demilitarized zone taking place there. Imagine if there was a party there. It seems very similar to the party that took place in the middle of the water between the nations, which I think is wonderful. Lastly, I would thank you so much for doing this interview, by the way. Savage Appetites, again, pick this book up. It's almost finished. And as soon as it is, you'll have to come back on and do an interview. Maybe you can come on our last podcast Patreon and talk about it, and we can do a deep dive into all the true crime-ness.
Yeah.
Which would be awesome. I want to talk a little bit, just finally, when it comes to the elections and when it comes to true crime, the two biggest, actors in both of these phenomenons, specifically in the past midterms, were women. Do you think that there's any correlation with what's going on now with women running for office doing extremely well at that, not just running like Wendy, and we love Wendy, but, obviously not able to pull it off. But women are actually winning, and they won in droves in this past midterm, much more than they did. I think 94 was the previous year where they called it like the women's house or something like this. But they really trumped that. They absolutely dominated that. And then the rise of true crime. Do you think that women are just now becoming more? Is there any correlation between those two things? Is there any? The more that you learn about something, the more you have power over it. So perhaps there's this fascination with true crime, and then women fascinated with politics, and finally saying, let's get involved. Is there any correlation there in your mind?
I mean, possibly, but to be honest, to hear you say that, it makes me nervous. I think a lot about the 90s, a lot of the bad criminal justice policies that we have in place now that we're slowly starting to dismantle, like the 3 strikes laws or mandatory minimums or the way that juveniles are treated as adults. A lot of that came up in the 90s out of the victims' rights movement, which was this offshoot, and you could say maybe like Persian of the feminist movement to these right-wing tough on crime ends. And so I guess maybe it's just personal cynicism, or I've been researching this stuff too long, but women are just as able to enact repressive policies as men are, and sometimes with a smiling, pretty face.
Well, that is an absolutely fascinating point. When it comes to, you're totally right. I mean, obviously it was the Clinton administration, 3 strikes, all of these things, mandatory minimums, the tough on crime. We have the war on drugs, obviously in the 80s, but the Clintons, Bill Clinton specifically, obviously advocated for by Hillary Clinton, really did push it forward. Isn't that fascinating? Why do you think that is? Is it because when it comes to good intentions, and of course the cliche, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, all this kind of stuff. When it comes to criminal justice, why is it always punishment? Is that just something, as you've researched true crime and just people in general, is that just something that's ingrained in us, that we want to see other people suffer? The Germans call it Schadenfreude, and that seems to be the cornerstone of our criminal justice system, not rehabilitation or trying to make these people better folks so they can come back and have jobs. We just want to see them punished and hurting. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it also stems from this sense that there is an us and a them, and that there's a category called victims and there's a category called, criminals or perpetrators. There's never any overlap, and any rights that you give to one side are taken away from the other side, and that, I could never find myself, I'm a nice white lady, so I could never find myself on the other side of that line. And I think that the worst thing that true crime can do is, the worst of its pleasures is making readers feel a kind of creepy satisfaction, but like feeling like they're good, right? I'm the good one. They're the bad one, and drawing that line. And I think if you look at how these policies actually are enacted, it doesn't follow that narrative at all. But that's an appealing kind of story, that kind of black and white, good guys, bad guys,
right,
drama.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for being on the show. Again, this is Rachel Monroe. Get her book. It's going to be out in August, Savage Appetites, and she's going to be back on while doing a Patreon interview. And after we can thumb through the book and read a little bit, I'm sure we'll have some great questions. Well, I hope we have great questions. I'm not sure about it. I would hope so. But I cannot wait to speak to you again. Rachel Monroe, if you want to, is there anything else you would like to plug? Obviously, check out her profile on Damien Echols in the New York Times. Read her in The New Yorker. Is there any other things that you're working on right now that you would like to tell the audience about?
I think nothing that I can talk about yet.
Ooh.
Find me on Twitter.
On Twitter at RACH Monroe, MONROE. Rach Monroe. All right. Thank you so much for being on the show. Rach Monroe. I love it. Thank you. All right. Well, Travis, thank you so much for being on the show, buddy. Woo. You excited? Little Ric Flair. That's great. Okay, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. We love you very much. We shall talk to you soon. Hail yourselves.